my own kind of military interest, if you like, it was something I was always interested in. I always wanted to join the army from a very young age. You know, whilst my friends were off playing football, I was playing commandos in the park at the bottom of the street. So yeah, it was something that I was always keen to progress into. So I joined when I was 17, and signed up to the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, and was claimed, as it was called back then, by my brother, and a fairly well respected older brother. So there was a degree of, you know, kind of my big brother took me under his wing. I suppose an interesting time at the time, because it was, I actually joined as the original Gulf War, if you like, was ongoing. My brother and his platoon didn't have the best of experiences in the first Gulf War. He was involved in a friendly fire incident that resulted in the loss, the death of several of his colleagues, and the serious injury of several more of them. During that training, I felt I matured. I suppose my views, I don't think, changed drastically. There were incidents that happened in training that made me become far more reflective, I would say. I was involved in a car crash the last 3 weeks of our basic training, and one of the lads I was training with, a young lad by the name of Nathan, was killed in that car crash. And that kind of had tinged my training, if you like, and made things become very realistic. You know, we'd been a lot of kind of the training in the infantry. You were looking at dealing with death and destruction, and all of a sudden that one incident brought that home very quickly. From Warmage to kind of my first deployment was to Bosnia. That must have been the winter of '93. So I suppose kind of really at kind of the height of the conflict, it was very much an ongoing issue at the time, and we deployed as I thought as NATO troops. Sorry, no, we didn't. We deployed as United Nations, as very much as a peacekeeping force. We flew. We landed at Dubrovnik, and kind of got off the plane, and it was nice and warm and sunny. Oh well, I quite fancy this. What have we let ourselves in for here? And we were issued ammunition and had our morphine turrets, and off we got in the back of a 4-ton wagon and started to drive, and continued to drive and continued to drive and continued to drive, and it got colder and colder and colder and colder. And the initial place we went to was very much, it was a platoon self-sustained position. It was out in the middle of nowhere. That first week, I suppose I was slightly lax in. I remember I was sat in the platoon office, and the sergeant came in and said, "Right, Frisby, there's a load of rubbish there. There's a skip out the back, a metal skip. It's about 50 metres away from the back of the building. Take all the rubbish out," because there was no refuse collection. "Take all the rubbish out and burn it." And there was about 5 or 6 black bin bags full of really rubbish. I don't know if you have any experience of ration packs from the army. There were lots of bits in there, but it included a thing called beef patty, which was like a little tin of self-sealing patty. Personally, I didn't like it, and not many other lads did, so it often got put in the rubbish. So the first time I walked out there, I was fairly lax. I had my weapon, I had my helmet, but I kind of strolled out there with a can of kerosene in 3 bin bags out to this metal skip, threw the 3 bin bags in, poured a load of kerosene in, and set it alight, and waited a couple of minutes, and then turned around to walk back to collect more bin bags to take it out. And as I was walking back, I heard what I assumed to be a rifle shot, and it really got my heart going, because I'm by myself in an area that I don't know. I didn't have a radio, you know, kind of stopped looking around to see what it was. And what it turned out it was the tins of beef patty that were in the rubbish, that were heating up with the heat, and going off pop. So having realised that, to my kind of amusement, I calmed myself down, went back, collected 4 or 5 more bags of rubbish, took it out to the skip, a little bit more kerosene, put these bags in, and whilst I'm stood there lighting the second time and heating up, 2 friends of mine came around the perimeter fence to do their patrol. and they'd been stood on the front gate for sort of 2 hours, -10, so it was quite chilly. And I'm stood chatting to one whilst the other goes over to the skip to warm himself on the now toasty blaze. That was the... Unfortunately, he's toasting himself as a tin of beef patty goes off pop and splatters his face with, as you can imagine, scalding hot beef patty. On reflection, it kind of descended into quite a comical scene, really. The lad called Andy, was effectively lying on the floor, holding his face, screaming and shouting in pain. I fell on my back and was giggling because I knew what had happened, and the third lad had effectively cocked his rifle and was spinning around through 360 degrees looking for the person that he assumed had shot Andy. So it was quite an amusing situation, but at the time, if you didn't know what was going on, the poor lad who didn't know what had happened was assuming we were under attack. So on the UN side of things, we often found, or at times you found yourself in situations that when you reflect on it, you think, maybe was that the best situation? An example of, we went to a body exchange, which is effectively the dead on both sides want to exchange their dead bodies for burial rights. It was at a place called Sansky Mosque, which at the time was considered to be the front line. It was on a mountain pass, so as I recall, kind of the right side of the road was just a sheer drop. The left side was a wood, and it was mined, and it was effectively no man's land between, I think, 15,000 Serbs on one side and between 10 and 12,000 Muslims on the other. They rolled up, both parties brought a flatbed lorry with them, and on the back of that flatbed lorries were the bodies. And they had obviously been loaded the night before and left outside because they were frozen. And they were parked in the sunshine. I remember sat with a Scouse lad, and we were guarding the trucks, and off the parties went to discuss their terms, which was effectively along the lines of, well, if you're only going to give us 25 bodies, we're only going to give you 25 bodies. Even though we've got 50, we're going to hold on to 25 corpses because you're only going to give us 25, so we're only going to give you 25 in return, which for me I found quite hard. But as the day progressed, the sun came out and started to shine on these trucks, and the heat of the sun started to defrost what had been frozen bodies the night before. And the smell, I suppose, out of everything was kind of the thing that stuck out for me. But it was I suppose that was part of the job. That was what we were there for, to help implement the peace. I suppose after Bosnia I returned back to the UK, and then I had my final 2.5 years in the army were in Londonderry in Northern Ireland. My time in Derry, I suppose, marked kind of a change in my military career, if you like. I'd been promoted at that point, so I was a Lance Corporal, but I'd changed my role as well, because again, prior to going out to Northern Ireland, I was with mortars, so I was with heavy weapons, and there wasn't really a role for heavy weapons, so I'd moved into a battalion level intelligence and surveillance. So I wasn't so much although I was in uniform, I wasn't really out on the streets as much. I spent a lot of time sat in a tower with a big pair of battleship binoculars, watching people and reporting on them. That was kind of my area of interest, if you like. I was a suspect recognition instructor. I would know people in the local area, kind of know their routines, know their vehicles, and I would report on that. And we tended to work kind of a 6-week turnaround there. It would be 2 weeks in the tower, 2 weeks back in the office, on the other end of the radio from the tower, logging and reporting all the sightings, and then 2 weeks training, and then you'd go through the whole process again, but instead of 2 weeks training, it would be 2 weeks leave. So it was quite nice then, because every 10 weeks you were off. You would work for 10 weeks and then be off for 2 weeks. So I suppose really for the first time in my military career, you could plan your leave. You knew more or less every 10 weeks I was going to be off for 2 weeks. So I quite liked that aspect of it. I left, returned back to the northeast. Did a couple of bits in between, but went on to join HM Coast Guard and spent sort of 8 years working in nautical search and rescue, and really enjoyed the process. And that's what brought me to Wales. The station that I was at Tyne's closed, and I moved to Holyhead on promotion. So I bought the local newspaper and was looking for other forms of employment. I saw probation officer in the paper. Didn't really know that much about it, if I'm honest. I didn't have any burning desires to be a probation officer. I kind of had an image of myself in a tan uniform with a pair of mirrored sunglasses and a bat on, and thought, yeah, I can do that. So applied, and here I am, kind of 12 years down the line. When I look at pictures of my colleagues now in uniform, they look like World War II veterans. You know, a lot of the colleagues I serve with now have 8 or 9 medals. It is not very often these days you see. You know, when I served, people generally had 1 or 2 medals. If you had 3 medals, you were, that was you. You know, you were rather long in the tooth and you'd been around. But as I see colleagues now that have got like 9, 10 medals, and I would say that's not something you see very often these days. But it's a career that I enjoy, and it's funny how it still kind of keeps me in contact with lots of ex-forces people, and it's again, I suppose it's something I reflect on, because at the time when I went to join the army, you know, my mother in particular was keen for me not to join, and I reflect on that because kind of 9 years later, when I decided I had enough and I was going to leave the army, there was almost a degree of role reversal there, from having a mother who initially didn't want me to join the army, to having a mum who was saying, hold on, why are you leaving the army? You know, it's something you're doing well at, you're making a career out of this. Why have you chose to leave?